Uh, Nidhi,
Yes, Manali, I'm here.
will you be introducing ma'am or will you be doing the moderating?
Uh, sure, you can introduce, ma'am. I'll take the moderating, no problem.
Sure. The poster is gone, by the way.
No, I'll share it back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's begin then.
Okay. Again, a very warm good evening to everyone. Today, on our fifth lecture, we have resource person as Professor Rekha Pande, ma'am, Director, Society for Empowerment through Environment Development Seed, Hyderabad. And her title is Hinduism and Gender. I warmly invitation to do this lecture in 7 days international webinar on rewriting her story, Itihasa Saptaha 3.0. Thank you so much, ma'am, and warmly welcome you. I also welcome Honorary President of the History Enthusiast, Shri Nandan Shastri sir, President Ms. Manali Momaya, and all the participants. Now I request Ms. Manali Momaya to introduce our today's resource person, Professor Rekha Pande, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Nidhi, for the warm welcome. Uh, it's again another honor. It's a privilege for me to introduce Professor Rekha Pande, ma'am. Professor Rekha Pande is a professor of history and women's studies. Her work is in the interdisciplinary area of history and the story of women's studies. She is currently a professor emeritus at the Henry Martin Institute at International Center for Research, Relations and Reconciliation, Hyderabad. She is also the director of Society for Empowerment through Environment Development, that is SEED. She was earlier the head of the Department of History and head Center for Women's Studies at the University of Hyderabad. She was also the director of Women's Studies Department at the Maulana Azad National Urdu University, Hyderabad. She has been the founding member of two centers for women's studies, one at Maulana Azad National Urdu University and the other at the University of Hyderabad. She was the chair of the Women's World Congress in 2014, organized for the first time in India. She has, to her credit, 24 books and more than 200 articles in national and international journals, book chapters, and proceedings. She has been the editor of International Feminist Journal of Politics, Routledge Taylor and Francis Group, United Kingdom. She also edited Foreign Policy Analysis, which is published by Blackwell, USA. She has received the visiting fellowship, Birkbeck Institute of Humanities, University of London, international visiting fellowship in the School of Policy Studies in the University of Bristol, UK, academic fellow, University of Buffalo, USA, that is New York, and international visiting scholar at Maison de Research, Paris, and visiting professorship at the University of Artois, Arras, France. She was invited as an erudite scholar for gender studies by the government of Kerala in 2016. She was also nominated as a peace ambassador for the South Asia region by the International Women's Peace Group, Korea, for the year 2016 to 2018. She has been the project director of 42 projects, guided 23 PhDs and 46 MPhil students in both history and gender studies. She has been an assessor for NAC and involved in the accreditation and evaluation of a large number of colleges and universities across India. She has widely traveled in India and abroad to deliver keynote addresses and lectures and present papers in national and international conferences. She has been recently invited by the National Commission for Women, Government of India, to be its resource person for gender sensitization and gender development programs in India. Ma'am was also there in the MOOC on gender studies, which we attended. I and Nidhi were fortunate to be part of it. It's again a pleasure to listen to your lecture, ma'am. We had that opportunity 1 year ago when we had a panel discussion on our YouTube channel on a gender related topic. So, welcome you once again on behalf of my entire team, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Manali, for that beautiful introduction. And good morning, Nandan Shastri and Manali Nidhi. I'm in the US now, so it's morning for me. I know it's night in India. And I'm really very impressed with this young lot of students who are so enthusiastic about history. And that's the reason I want to connect to this group, because I feel, our time is over. We have done whatever we could do. And now, if we can nurture these young students, and I'm so glad that I found this group which was so enthusiastic, so interested, the kind of debates that they have, that it's a pleasure being associated with them. Can you see my screen? Is my screen visible?
Yes, now it's visible.
Yes.
Okay. So, my topic is on Hinduism and gender. And I would, like to discuss this for today's talk. Now, what do we mean by religion? When we talk of religion, religion is a historically transmitted system of beliefs, and it has meanings. These are embedded in symbols through which knowledge about power, order, and truth that help us guide our life are communicated, developed, perpetuated, and transformed. Whereas culture is the whole pattern of historical transmitted meanings. Again, these are also embedded in symbols that help us, guide through our life, uh, through which, it is communicated, developed, perpetuated. What is interesting is that different cultures impact with each other in different ways, and there is a continuous multiple flow. Now, gender and religion are both aspects of a person's identity. When we talk of gender, we refer to the social and our cultural roles, our behaviors, what is expected from us, what being associated as a male or female or even non-binary means. Whereas religion, as I explained, is a set of belief practices and rituals that are based on faith and spirituality. Now, both religion has a very significant impact on gender roles, expectations, and many religions have specific teachings and traditions regarding the roles of both men and women in a community. We find that in some religion, the roles are very rigid, and in others they are very flexible, or in some religion they are egalitarian. It varies depending on different religion. But what is important to know that there is a lot of diversity in each religion, and not all followers may adhere to the same kinds of beliefs or practices. Now, gender plays a very significant role in religious practices and experiences, because we may see that in some religions, men and women are separated during worship, and in certain religions, women are required to wear certain kind of clothing or to cover their head. And all this depends on, how the community is practicing it, how it has developed over a period of time. And it is really important that we respect individuals' gender and religious identity. And we cannot make any assumptions based on either. Both of these are very complex, personal aspects, and a lot depends on a person's belief, behavior, and experiences. Now, there is a lot of variation. I'm going to focus only on Hinduism, and see that, how there is a lot of diversity. There is also a complexity. Sometimes, there is a mingling, there is an intersection of gender and religion, because, gender and religion intersect in very complex way. And we find that religious beliefs and practices, they often influence the attitude towards gender and gender norms. Gender can impact an individual's religious identity, participation, and experiences. We may find that, in many religions, women face a lot of barriers in participating in some religious tradition. Sometimes in few religions, they are excluded from leadership position. In some religions, they are excluded from certain religious ritual. So, the whole relationship between religion and gender is very multifaceted, and it depends a lot on different religions and how that religion has developed in a historical context. Now, I'm going to limit myself only to Hinduism. Now I'm talking of a history which is more than 5,000 years old, and to sum it up in a hour's time is really not possible, but let me try my best. There is a lot of divergence as far as the religious beliefs and practices of Hindus are concerned. It is so divergent that it cannot constitute a coherent monolith religious system. If we look at a historical gaze at Hinduism, points out that to view this as a single religious system is really not correct, and it is a distortion of the heterogeneous religious practices that have developed down the ages. What we see as the imagined Hinduism today is very much a making of the modern period. Now, what is Hinduism? We know it's one of the oldest religions of humanity. It is referred to as Sanatan, eternal Dharma. Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, they owe a lot to Hinduism. And the basic principle of Hinduism is tolerance and diversity. It says truth is one, but there are various parts to it. There are so many different deities, but there is a single impersonal ultimate reality. So in that sense, Hinduism is both a philosophy and a way of life. It focuses both on this world as well as the other world. Now, what is unique about Hinduism is it has had no one single founder. There is no hierarchical clergy. It does not talk of any direct divine revelation. There is no rigidly prescribed moral code. And what we see is Hinduism has evolved from primitive animism to polytheism to monism, and it has not rejected any. See, generally when religions develop, they move from one stage to other. The earlier one is rejected. But Hinduism carries with it. Today also we worship animals, we worship trees, we worship other kinds of idols. So Hinduism does not discard the various deities of different faiths and cults, but regards them also as manifestation of God. So Hinduism is polytheistic, monotheistic, and monistic. There are different gods and goddesses that are worshipped. Some are in forms which are considerably distant from the Sanskrit textual depiction. You must have seen, we all celebrate Ganesh Chaturthi, and you have all these pandals which are put up, and nobody objects to it. You can see a Ganesh with a mobile, you can see Ganesh in front of a computer, Ganesh riding a motorcycle, and that is what is the whole diversity about, and it is very welcome. Vishnu, Shiva, and Devi are the principal deities, and they have different forms. Now, what is interesting is throughout history, if we look at it, there have been so many movements that have questioned this whole authorities of the Vedas. They have tried to create an alternative religious space for themselves. And that is what I'm going to focus on. Now, how did Hinduism begin? Let me just give a background. Like I already mentioned, there's no particular founder. You have traces of Hinduism in the Indus Valley civilization 5,000 years back. When the Aryans come, you have the Vedic tradition which develops. You have various rituals, many gods, the sacred texts are composed. There is a social stratification which is there. Upanishads are developed. And it is this Vedic tradition which is developed. Now, what are the sacred scriptures? You have Shruti, which is referred to as the herd, the oldest and the most authoritative one. Among these, you have the 4 Vedas, which are regarded as truth: Rig Veda, Sam Veda, Atharveda, and Yajur Veda. Besides this, there are so many myths, ritual chants which are there. the Upanishads, which talk of the metaphysical speculation. And then you have the Smriti, something which is heard, or the Itihasa, the great Indian epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. And besides these, you have so many texts. You have the Puranas, teaching of the Vedas through myths, stories, legends, lives of saints. You have the Agamas, which do not derive any authority from the Vedas, but they are not antagonistic to the teachings of the Vedas. They are like manuals of worship. You still find them in so many temples in the south. Then you have the whole aspect of darshan, light or vision, the philosophical treatise, which prescribe a way of looking at truth, the 6 darshans, Nyaya, Vishesh, Samkhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. Now, what are the whole spiritual practices? You have the 4 yogas, which seek, union with the divine. We talk in terms of the Karma Yoga, the Gyan Yoga, the Raj Yoga, and the Bhakti Yoga. You can reach the ultimate truth to any of these. It also talks of a guru, a spiritual teacher, which will help you in achieving that Gyan and Raj Yoga. Now, how do Hindu worships? You have the Bhakti Yoga, where you seek union with the divine through the manifestation of deities, and you can worship the gods at home. You have household shrines. You can also worship God in the temples, the priests which officiate these. Then you can have the puja, making offerings or to the decorating the deities in different images. I was just seeing, nowadays people share so much on WhatsApp. When you put up 2 pots, develop them. How do we worship Devi? You create the Devi on your own. Then we also have darshan, where you go and see the deity. And then prasad, you take the divine with your own being through eating food and sharing it with the deity. Now, the major gods are Brahma, Vishnu, and, Vishnu with his 10 avatars, which include Ram, featured in the Ramayana, Krishna, featured in the Mahabharata. You also have Mahesh, Shiva, the god of constructive destruction, the transformer. And Shiva appears as Nataraj, the creation, dance of creation, and his wife is Parvati, the son Ganesh, the elephant-headed god. Now, what about goddesses? We also worship the feminine divine. Parvati is seen as the divine mother, the wife of Shiva. Then Lakshmi, the goddesses of good fortune, the consort of Vishnu. Then you see Durga as the protectors, and Kali as the destroyer of demons. Besides these, we have more than 330 million other deities. Now, what is very interesting and to remember, that all these deities are but manifest forms, attributes, and functions of the impersonal Brahma. The ultimate reality is one, and you can worship it through these different forms. And there is no antagonism against this. And what is very important is the power of Devi is, which is very well established. Although you have so many goddesses, they are depicted as consorts, and these are not independent deities. And yet there is a notion of a divine power. And this divine power is feminine in Hinduism. Shakti or power, which is a feminine noun. And according to this view, without Shakti, the gods are powerless. And the ultimate power of the universe, that of the Devi and the great goddesses. And we as human beings are also manifestation of God. This is something which is very interesting. We are not human beings having spiritual experiences, but we are spiritual beings having a human experience. That are thou. So, Hinduism recognizes all this pervasiveness of the divine. You never refer to the country as fatherland in Hinduism. It is always referred to as motherland. In recognition of the fact that the land in which we live, it nurtures us. It, lovingly takes care of us as our own mother. By the way, today in the US, it is Mother's Day. And so, we look upon the whole country as motherland. We worship, Indians worship India as Bharat Mata. Janani Janma Bhumischa Sarvapapi Garyasi. Sri Ram said that one's mother and motherland are even superior to heaven. That's the basic philosophy. And in Shaivism, you have this whole concept of Ardhanareshwar, where Shiva is represented as half man and half women. Again, in Vaishnavism, also Vishnu incarnates as a woman to protect the dharma, the Mohini avatar. So, God is worshipped as either parent or mother. And whenever you worship God as parents, it is the mother who takes precedence over the father. And both men and women are manifestations of God. There is also a very close, interlinking of ecology and environmentalism in this religion. Because according to Hinduism, the whole universe is alive. It is pervaded by the supreme being, body of the God. So we refer to earth and nature as Prithvi. Earth is Prithvi and nature is Prakriti, that is feminine. We refer to the rivers as Ma Ganga, Ma Saraswati, because these rivers are also a manifestation of feminine deity. And even grains, you worship the grains as a manifestation of Devi Annapurna. And besides this, you worship trees, forests, the whole abode of feminine deity. We have this whole concept of sacred groves, sacred trees, sacred plants. Even mother cow, the symbol of motherly love, is worshipped. See, what is very interesting is here is a religion which is one. It talks of so much. It talks of unity at one level. There is so much of diversity. There is no antagonism in philosophy. It worships all kinds of forms. It is very close to nature. Now, when we look at Hinduism women, it's a very complex relationship. It has nothing to do with the philosophy and how it is interpreted. Because again, you cannot say that though there is a central philosophy, this is the underlying philosophy. Hinduism has developed historically down the ages. And we see that the whole relationship with gender has developed in a very complex way. In traditional Hinduism, the gender roles were very clearly defined. Women were subordinate to men, and yet we did have examples of very powerful figures in Hindu mythology and history. In the ancient Hindu text, the Rig Veda, there are a lot of hymns that praise goddesses such as Usha, Aditi, Saraswati. And again, if you look at Ramayana, you look at Mahabharata, we've had very powerful female figures over here, whether you look at it in terms of Sita or you look at it in terms of Draupadi. And then you also had deities like Durga, Kali, Lakshmi, who are both revered by men and women. Yet, over the years, what happened, Hindu texts present a very diverse and conflicting view on the position of women. It ranges from feminine leadership as the highest goddesses to limiting their role as obedient daughter, housewife, and mother. In the Devi Shuktam, the hymns of the Rig Veda, it declares the feminine energy as the essence of the universe, the one who creates all matter and consciousness, the eternal and infinite, the metaphysical and empirical reality, Brahma and the soul. And then, women are celebrated as the most powerful and empowering force in some Hindu Upanishads, Shastras, Puranas, especially in the Devi Upanishad, Devi Mahatmya, the Devi Bhagavata, Puran. You have these. And yet, if you look at it, the female is created by Brahma. And in this duality in creation, she has to provide company to the men. She has to facilitate procreation, progeny, and the continuation of the family lineage. And according to Manusmriti, her father protects her in childhood, her husband in her youth, and her son in old age. And it says that women are never fit to be independent. Yet, again, in the same section, the text asserts that women must be honored and adorned. Where women are revered, there the gods rejoice. But where they are not, no sacred right bear any fruit. So, you have all these complex themes which come up. The Vedas suggest that a woman's primary duty is to help her husband in performing these obligatory duties and enabling him to continue his family tradition. The primary duty of a woman is to give birth to children and take care of them. And again, when we talk of children, it is a very patriarchal society, very son-oriented society. So you have these first group of texts which confirm that, according to that there were many women who composed the Vedic hymns. Approximately 1% of the Rigvedic hymns are attributed to women. You have a lot of women philosophers that come up, they debate with men, Gargi, Maitri in the Upanishad. Then you see the sacrifices. The wife plays a very instrumental role in performing of the public rituals. And then later on, if you look at the Manusmriti, they are denied even access to learning. So, as historically we develop from a period of composing hymns to a period where you are denied access to even education. And marriage for a woman became equated with a religious initiation. Like the Upanayan sanskar is for the men, marriage becomes for the women. And she is offered to the husband. It is equated with his religious studentship to perform these household duties, and it is done by worshipping the sacrificial fire. And her whole domestic duties constitute her religious life. The importance of procreation gives rise to the image of womb as a field, the kshetra, which is referred. And according to Mahabharata, by cherishing the women, one virtually cherishes the goddess of prosperity herself. Because wife under the Hindu law is not only the Graha Patni, but also the Dharma Patni and the Sadharmini, who will help you achieve nirvana. The wife is a husband's best friend. She is the source of dharma, arth, kam, and moksha. And then, God is imagined as feminine. In fact, Hinduism is the only major religion that has worshipped God in female form, and it continues to do that even today. Many Hindus refer to God's energy as Shakti, the personification of the goddesses. Today, many of the festivals which we have, the Vasant Panchami, Navratri, Dashera, they are all dedicated to goddesses. And many of the social practices today, historically, though they have not lived up to the Hindu ideal of gender equality and mutual respect, we find that in terms of philosophy, this is interwoven in Hinduism. In fact, Hinduism remains one of the very few major religions in which women have occupied and continue to occupy a most respectable position in spiritual leadership. And then, you have so many other representations of this relationship in the Sankhya philosophy. You have Purusha, the indestructible self, male, aloof, perfect, and Prakriti, the manifestation defined as female, needing attention, longing to serve the cause of male's self-entrapment into existence. The Purush-Prakriti dichotomy is clearly intended to apply to all existence and all individuals, including women. And however, the cultural stereotypes that have developed underlying these philosophical messages are undeniable. And the implication that truly religious man must abandon both women and the world if he is to obtain his goal. This is something which developed over a period of time. And then, historically, so many practices developed over the period. The Hindu women did not have a right to divorce her husband. She had no property or inheritance right. Even the choice of a partner was limited because she had to marry within her own caste. There has to be horoscope matching. And then, the girl has to be given in sacrifice as a kanyadan with a dowry. And the Stri Dhan is the only dhan over which she has a right. And then you had the practice of sati, which developed. She could never remarry. The widows were treated so badly. She was seen as a curse in, public. She could not wear jewelry, colorful clothes. All these developed historically. And child and infant marriage became encouraged. But what is interesting is, in spite of all these developments, from time to time, we have had so many movements that have questioned. And today, again, now I'm in my second part of my lecture, I'm going to focus on one of these movements which developed in the Bhakti movement. and they question, you had this right to question religion. And here you have, on one, it's a very interesting example of diversity in Indian culture, because you had women from different parts of the country who were questioning this. And it came from, you have the concept of bhakti, which is there, as I mentioned already, in the Vedas. And this is something which develops right from 7th to 8th century. Now, what is very interesting is this movement created a space for women, because women practice it. I was listening to Uma Chakravarti's lecture. She also ended her lecture where she was talking of bhakti. And she said, whereas for the men, there was no issue. The men could practice bhakti, and, it did not conflict with their daily, day-to-day life. But for women, it was not that easy. Women had to either choose their bhakti or continue with their daily life. And this is what I'm going to really elaborate upon today. And in spite of that, it is very interesting that on one hand, you had all the men. The men are claiming all these rights. They were against the Brahmin, they were against the temple, they were against the ritual. They wanted an equal society where everybody is equal. And yet, these rights were not as far given to the women. They did not look upon women in the same light. All these demands were only for themselves. They continue to reinforce and reiterate the already existing notions of women, family, and their roles. Now, what was very interesting, you had a group of women who came up, and from different, right from 12th century to about 17th, 18th century, they exploited this whole religious emotion, and they dealt with patriarchy. In negotiating patriarchy, they were able to create an alternate space for themselves. What they did was they challenged patriarchy and the mortal man to whom they were tied in a relationship of marriage by extending this definition of love to God. So, instead of continuing with that man, they, the God could become their lover, God could be their husband, God could be their friend, God could be their guru. And they refer to themselves either as a lover, a wife, a mistress, a friend, and a servant. So all this space was created by this movement. You had so many women, say in Karakal Ammar of Tamil Nadu, then you have Akka Mahadevi in Karnataka, 12th century, Muktabai in Maharashtra, 13th century, Laleshwari in Kashmir, 14th century, Janabai in Maharashtra, 13th, 14th century, Mirabai in Rajasthan, end of 14th, beginning of 15th century, Bahina Bai in Maharashtra, 17th century. I just wanted to share my books on these aspects. I published Religious Movement in Medieval India in 2005. Divine Sounds from the Heart was published by Cambridge Scholar Publishing in 2010. And again, 2020, they brought out another edition. Now, when we look at the lives of all these women, see, these are women who are spread across from different centuries. They are in different parts of the world, and yet you can see some kind of a commonality. Akka Mahadevi is the daughter of a very rich merchant of Udutal, during the 12th century. She was a great devotee of Shiva, and according to legend, she grew up as a very beautiful woman. The chieftain of the land, Kaushiki, fell in love with her, and he was an unbeliever. Now, he forced, because he was so powerful, he forced her to marry him. And Akka Mahadevi puts up a promise that, according to legend, that he will not touch her against her wishes. But when this happens 3 times, she walks out of her home. And when she walks out naked. You have images of Akka where, her long hair are covering her, but she walks about naked. That's the ultimate truth with which she is facing. And she is 12th century, Karnataka. Lal Ded is in 14th century, in Kashmir. She is married at the age of 12 to another Brahmin family whose name is Nikka Bhatt in Pimpore. We have so many legends, she's so beautiful. She weaves such beautiful silk, but her mother-in-law is so cruel to her. She's tortured for 12 years, and finally she just leaves home. And what is interesting is when she leaves home, she walks out naked. Imagine 12th century to 14th century, one in Karnataka, one in Kashmir. And according to legend, her stomach grows, which to such an extent that her private parts are, covered. And she dances in a frenzy. And that is the reason she's referred to as Lal Date. Lal in Kashmiri, referring to the lower part of the belly, which increases in size and hangs over her pubic region. Mirabai belongs to 15th, 16th century. Mirabai is a pan-Indian figure. Everybody knows about her. The others, many people don't know. She comes from Rajasthan. As a child, she asks her mother, according to legend, there is a marriage procession which is going on. And she keeps asking her mother who's going to be her groom. And she just picks up a statue of Krishna and says, this is your groom. And Meera grows up thinking of Krishna as a lover. When she's married, she's not happy. She refuses to consummate her marriage with her husband, and she finds more solace in the company of saints. And finally, she also, though she belongs to the upper class, she also has to leave. Sehju Bai is, in the period of 1683 to 1765. If you read some of her works in Sahajo Prakash, she belongs to the Chandradasi sect. You find her life, she's grinding corn, she's carrying water, she's sweeping, digging, and she says only those who are very brave can follow the path of bhakti. Devalabai and Gaurabai are again from Gujarat, and Devalabai is a child widow from Deobal. Her father is very poor. She is then left in charge of Dadu Guru Bhagwan, and she becomes a great devotee of Rama, who teaches her the Ramayana. Ganga Sati is another poetess from Gujarat. And we have, see what is very interesting, none of these women wrote. It was an oral tradition which was handed down to us. It was written much more later in the 18th century. The Bhaktamal Katha, you have many of the writings of these women which are there. So there would have been a lot of interpolation. I'm not denying that. And yet, in spite of that, this becomes a very critical source for us to recreate history and write her story, because many of the voices of women are not there. History only talks about men. It is the views of men. The archives, all the writings are about men, and we represent, this is the universal view which is there. So how do we get women's voices? How do we create women's history? So we have to look at different kinds of sources. We have to look, the historical records will not give us anything. Historical resources, records are very limited. Historiography will be very limited. We have to look at methods from sociology, anthropology, and then try to write her story. So similarly, Ganga Sati from Gujarat was there. She was married to Kaluba. He is one of the very famous saints in Saurashtra. According to this, Kaluba was such a big saint that many of the Rajputs, came to him and they said that if you are such a religious man, please bring back this dead cow to life. And according to legend, he really prayed and that cow came back to life. But then he realized that day in and day out, he'll be asked to prove his bhakti. And he did not want it. So he decided to take, Mahasamadhi. He renounced the life. Now, Ganga Sati wanted to commit sati with him. But he stopped his wife and he said, no, I have all my knowledge I have passed on to you. And you should pass on this knowledge to our daughter-in-law. See, this is such an interesting example. That first time knowledge is transmitted to her daughter-in-law. And she composed about 40 bhajans and hymns. And this is the first case of, in history where you have this knowledge which is passing on to the daughter-in-law. Then you have also example of Toral. Toral was another Kanti woman. She's married to Sansatya. These were low caste Rajputs, but they belong to a marital race. At that time, there was a big dacoit in Kutch region. His name is Jaisal. And he had announced that he's going to capture three things. One is Tati, Toli, and Toral. Now, Tati was a very famous sword and he was able to get it. Toli was a very famous mare at that time. And Toral was this woman who's already married and he wanted to, because she's so beautiful, he wanted to possess her. And according to legend, once after the kirtan, when she goes around distributing prasad, every day, the prasad would be over by the number of devotees who attended the satsang. But that day, one portion was left. So her husband came up, and San Satya was the name of her husband. And he called out loud and he said, "Who is hiding? Please come up." And then, we find that Jessel comes out and he says that, he had taken this vow that he wants Thoral. And very happily, the husband hands over his wife to this dacoit. According to legend, it was Thoral's mission in life that she's going to change the life of many fallen men. And they are traveling by boat on the way to Kutch, and there is a severe storm. The boat is rocking, and Jessel is so terrified for life. Then Thoral starts asking him questions. She tells him to narrate his life. How did he go about? And he talks about his life, all his sins, the robberies, the dacoity, how he killed bridegrooms, how did he steal, he hunted deers, peacocks, he let down children. And as he narrates his story, the storm starts calming down. Janabai is another very interesting person, she in the period 1298 to 1350 from Maharashtra. She is a maid servant. And, in the house of Gyandev. And according to the Abhangs, if you read her Abhangs, she talks about her daily life, her work in cooking, cleaning, washing. She does not get any time to herself. She is a maid servant who is serving all the others. There is nobody to serve her. So it's very interesting if you look at history from her point of view. Here is a person when she's so tired, Krishna comes and plats her hair, he puts oil in her hair, he takes out lice from her hair, and it's so interesting because her worldview is in the same way. Bahinabai is another very interesting. I can go on, but I know time limit, but let me quickly go through some of these. Maharashtra, she's a saint from Maharashtra. She's the only woman whose autobiography is available. She was born in a Brahmin family in 17th century. When she is 3 years old, she is married to Ratnakar Pathak, who's 30 years old. Obviously, for Ratnakar Pathak, it is a second marriage. For her, it is first. At the age of 7, she comes to Kolhapur to live with her husband. And she has to suffer so much. If you read an autobiography, the way she is beaten, she's not allowed to practice. She becomes very fond of Tukaram. And he says, what? We are Brahmins and you want to, listen to this Tukaram who's saint. And according to her autobiography, her husband starts thinking that he will leave her. And finally, this is something which is unheard of in Hinduism, that a man will leave his wife. And then, God intervenes and her husband falls sick and she nurses him back so much that finally, she's able to get back. Now, I just want to say, what is the common thread which runs across the lives of all these women? Right from 12th century to 17th century. These are women who are in different parts of the country. They are writing in different languages. They are worshipping in different ways. And yet they had a very good childhood. They had a very easy childhood. They were very loved and cared. All their problems start after marriage, when, they refuse to accept the husband as all-purpose. And what these women did, instead of the husband, they put all their loyalties in this God. Bhakti gives them that space where, the God becomes their husband, the lover, the friend. I'll just read out few poems. I have used English translations so that you can understand. I'm using A.K. Ramanujam. Akka Mahadevi talks about the constant conflict. Husband inside, lover outside. I can't manage them both. This world and the other, I can't manage them both. Oh Lord, white as jasmine, I cannot hold in one hand both the round net and the long bow. She talks about tassels in her married life. Again, I love this handsome one. He has no death, decay or form, no place or side, no end or birthmark. I love him. Oh mother, listen, so the Lord white as jasmine is my husband. Take these husbands who decay and die and throw them into your kitchen fires. Imagine in 12th century, you have a woman, Akka Mahadevi, who is speaking in such revolutionary terms. You have all these notions of Sati Vrata, Prati Vrata, and women who have to listen to their husband. But here is a woman who says, take these husbands who decay and die and throw them into your kitchen fires. She looks upon husband because he'll never die. He is the one whom death cannot destroy. Meera says, friends, marriage of this world are false. They are wiped out of existence. Wed my indestructible one, the serpent death cannot devour. So, the underlining theme, they are forced into marriage. They get married because, they cannot go against the tradition. And yet, religion gives them that space where they can question their whole marriage. They can question their husband. And then, Meera says, I constantly rise up, go to the temple and dance, snapping my figures. I don't follow the norm. As the oldest daughter-in-law, I have thrown away the veil. And she openly dances. Pad gunguru band Meera nachi re. Log kahe Meera hoye bavari. Saas kahe kulna sire. That she has brought defame. They come from a royal family. By dancing openly in public, she has brought defame. All of us know that, there were so many attempts at trying to kill Meera. They send her so many, serpents and they poison her drink, and yet she survives. Bahina Bai, in one of her abhang, she says, what can I do? I'm born of women. And yet she cannot abandon her bhakti. She says, the Vedas cry aloud, the Puranas shout. No good comes to a woman. I was born with a woman's body. How am I to attain the truth? They are foolish, seductive, and deceptive. Any connection with the women is disastrous. Bahina says, if a woman's body is so harmful, how will I reach the truth? Everybody looks upon truth because according to Hinduism, by this time, Kanak Kamini, if you want to attain God, you have to, abandon God, you have to abandon property. Kanak is women. You have to abandon women and you have to abandon all the luxuries of life. So if you abandon Kanak and Kamini, possession and women, only then you can reach God. There are so many interesting stories which are there. The men are very, they speak in these terms. And yet, you look upon the God as a male and they imagine themselves as women when they are worshipping, whether it is Kabir or, in many places, Tulsi also refers to it. Janabai says, let me not be sad because I am born of women. In this world, many saints suffer in this way. Cast off all shame and sell yourself in the marketplace. Then alone you can hope to reach the Lord. See, something which is really controlling a woman is this whole notion of respectability. In a marriage, how a woman has to behave, how she has to do. She brings respect not only to herself, but to the family. That is more important. When these women openly talk, she says, cast off your shame, throw away your pallu. She says, I am in the marketplace. She openly calls herself a whore. When she openly calls herself a whore, when women walk out naked, what more can you say? So that is the ultimate sign of protest which these women have. And Akka Mahadevi says, oh Shiva, when shall I crush you on my pitcher breast? Imagine 12th century. Oh Lord, white as jasmine, when do I join you, stripped of my body's shame and my heart's modesty? And what is very interesting is, if you read all these writings, they are beyond gender. The men are very clear that this is what is expected of women, this is what is expected of the men. They want all these rights for themselves, and women should continue to be good housewives, good wives, good mothers, etc. But for women, it does not really matter. Dasami says, if they see breast and long hair coming, they call it a woman. If they see beards and whiskers, they call it a man. But look at that self that hovers in between is neither a man nor a woman. Again, Akka Mahadevi says, suppose you cut a tall bamboo into two, make the bottom piece a woman and the head piece a man. Now rub them together and kindle a fire. Now tell me, is that fire which kindled a man or a woman? So, for the women, it does not matter. In fact, it's very interesting, if you read my book, I've really gone into detail in a lecture, I cannot go. The women want to do away with the women and yet they are obsessed. They talk so much about the women. The women don't even, if an impediment for a man in his bhakti is a woman, then it should be the other way around. The impediment for a woman should be a man. But the women don't even talk about the men. They only talk about these whole notions which cripple a woman's life, Suhagan, how she has to dress, how she has to behave. They don't even mention about women. There is a very interesting story in the Bhaktamal Katha. Meera goes to Vrindavan. She wants to meet a very famous saint over there. And she goes there, and when she reaches the door, she sends a message saying that Meera has come here and she wants to meet the saint. And he writes back saying that he has taken a vow that he's not going to look at the face of any woman. Then Meera writes back to him saying, I'm really surprised that there is another man who is staying in Vrindavan. She refers to Jeev Goswami as that. She says, I thought there was only one man in Vrindavan. See, they are all worshipping Krishna. And then Jeev Goswami comes out and he falls at her feet. So you have so many of these interesting myths and stories which are woven around this. So, if you read the whole notion of gender is very complex, and how it develops over a period of time, an open coalition, how you affirm your identities, how these identities are alternated, relinquished, and it is, you have these multiple convergence which you have, as Judith Butler tells us. Then when you look at the whole identity within the Bhakti tradition, we find that the women get this power to subvert the authoritative Brahmanism with this whole little space through convergence or divergence. And therefore, I would really like to conclude by saying that, it is through this medium that these women get these spaces, they are able to negotiate. But what is interesting, they could get that space because Hinduism allowed this kind of dissent. You could question it, you could, critique it, and there would be, the Hinduism which we have developed today is very different from how we would look at it. This whole, there is so much of democracy, there is a space for questioning. And therefore, in conclusion, I would just sum up saying that Hinduism has always worshipped divinity in female form, as Shakti. Women continue to play a very prominent role in Hindu society right from ancient time till today. Over the time, what has happened, the whole disconnect between Hindu philosophy and the reality became much more wider, and we find that as, history developed, women started being treated as less than equal. But what is very interesting is, though you had all these notions of Sativrata, Pativrata, and how a woman should behave, how a woman should be, from time to time, you had a lot of women who questioned Hinduism. It was not that easy. Their bhakti always came in conflict with their religion. They had to sacrifice a lot. They went through a lot, the pain, their day-to-day trauma is something which you can really feel through their writings. And this bhakti movement becomes a very good example of this. And yet, you had all these women who really, in this long line to retain our rights, they played a very major role. Today, Hinduism pushes for a greater gender equality. And in many of the sects of Hinduism, the Shakta tradition is emphasized. In few temples, women are allowed to become priests, and these roles which were traditionally reserved for women. And yet we find that so much of inequality continues to persist. We know very well that in many temples, women are not allowed to enter during menstruation. There are so many conservative attitude towards their roles and rights. So, it's a very complex relationship. You cannot say that this is it, when you look at, because on one hand, you have the whole philosophy as it develops, and you have the historical truth which develops. And it has become a very complex, it is very, yet it is very evolving. There is a mix of tradition and progressive attitude towards gender roles and equality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, ma'am, for this really thought-provoking lecture. Uh, I actually want to thank you first of all for reminding us of the story of Jaisal and Toral. Personally, it used to be my favorite story in my childhood because I am from Kutch, and my grandmother used to tell me that story when I was a child. So thank you very much for that. I want to ask a question, ma'am.
Yeah, please go ahead.
It is not exactly about Hinduism, but something related with gender, and also we can connect it to the religion part of it. We see that in many temples, in the ancient temples, we have female figurines that have not covered their breasts. They are naked, and it was normal. It was fine. Then, during what period or when exactly the sexualization part began? Like, women started to be viewed as objects of sexual gratification rather than human beings. So, was that a gradual change or?
Yeah. See, Manali, what you're referring to as, women not covering their breasts, or even if you look at the sculptures in Ajanta, Ellora and all, you only have women, with a piece of cloth which is there. So, according to, historically, stitching is something which came up in the medieval period. And in many of the Brahmin families, you must have seen, when earlier, if you remember your grandmothers, and, at least I remember my grandmother, when you had to cook, you had to, first take a bath. And in South, you even, go with a wet sari. You cannot wear a petticoat or a blouse. This is something, I come from the Uttarakhand region, and you just kind of covered. All these practices have gone now, but that was out because stitching was very much associated with a different culture. So you still have, it was at that time, when we had all these notions of, how a woman's body should be covered, maybe it came in. And then it becomes more and more defined as Victorian morals come in. If you remember in Kerala, the whole upper cloth movement, where only a lower caste women were not allowed to cover their breasts, there was a big agitation against that. So you've always used the women's body, and it's a patriarchal society which determines how it is going to develop. So I mean, again, these are aspects where we can only talk generally. Not much research has gone into it, though of course the upper class movement, one of my students has worked for a PhD. These are areas we really need to sit and research, and then we would be able to talk with a lot of authenticity.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because there is so much hypocrisy in some places. Women are often told to dress traditionally or, dress like the ancestors. They used to be so modest and all that. But in reality, that kind of a dressing system came only very recently. And when we say traditionally, it is difficult to, as a student of history, it is difficult to understand what they're meaning to say. So that's why I asked this question, ma'am.
Yeah.
Nandan Shastri sir has posted a question in the chat box.
Yeah.
Rekha ji, what are your views about Hindu women born abroad and some of them who are disciples of only one specific cult? For example, Swaminarayan cult. What are your observations in USA in context of new generation and the young girls' rebellious thoughts?
See, when I look at rebellious thought, I don't think it is only to do with the US or India. It is more a generational thing. The younger people, I don't think my children would also want to look at religion and look at the practices the way it is done in India. See, because unlike Christianity and Islam, like I said, there is so much of a liberty in our religion. We do not insist. Hinduism does not insist that this is what you have to do. You have to do this and only then you'll be a Hindu. See, unless you read the Quran, believe in Muhammad, or, follow the Rosas, you cannot be a true Muslim. Unless you follow the Bible, go to the church, you cannot be. But Hinduism, you cannot. There are 1,001 practices. All of us have developed, and we don't insist. So I don't think, this has something to do with abroad or Indian. It is more a generational thing, because earlier maybe rituals were very important, families were joined, we were growing up, we saw a lot of these happening, because social life was only around these rituals, around these religious things. But today, with the nuclear family developing, people becoming more educated, mobile taking over a lot of time, all these practices have gone. So it is more to do with the generational thing and the modern development. I see no issue in people following a single cult, because again, that is something which is allowed. I said, the strength of Hinduism is that we do not insist that this is what you have to do. Yes, we did have a lot of conflicts between the Vaishnavite and the Shaivites, and all these different traditions were there. And yet, today also, if you look at household, prayer, puja room, you have different gods who occupy. It's not that you only have Shiva, or you only have Ram, or you only have Krishna. They all very happily, they all share that space. And that is the strength of Hinduism, which we need to really bring about. So, whether you follow one cult or you follow different kinds of cult, it is something which does not matter, because if you follow the principles where you respect others, the famous song of 15th century, Vaishnava Jan Tene Kahiye Peer Parai Jane, who is a true Hindu, one who understands the pain of others. The Global Summit has made that, Vasudev Kutumbakam, the whole world is one. If we follow those principles, I think we are still very much following Hinduism. Fine. So I don't see any issues in that. And yes, you do have, in many of the NRI communities now, they feel that the children are being removed. Though I find that, again, the same thing is happening in India. But since we are in India, we don't bother. Here, parents do take their children to the temple. They go on temple. There are lots of activities which are woven around the temple. Fine.
Thank you so much, ma'am. If anybody else has a question, I think we can take one more question. If anybody wants to ask a question, you can raise your hand and unmute yourself. Okay. I think there are no more questions, ma'am.
Fine.
Yes. So, I would like to take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks, ma'am, here.
Hello, ma'am.
Okay, there's
Yeah.
Sorry, ma'am. My side, I'm not. But here, but ma'am, one question. मैम मेरे को ना मैं आपका थोड़ा मैं कुछ कर रहा था तो मैं करते करते आपको सुन रहा था मैम एक मेरे को पतिव्रता और आपने सतीव्रता के ऊपर एक आपके लेक्चर के अंदर कुछ चल रहा था मैंने जिसको मैं जितना मैंने सुना मैम मेरे को एक चीज थोड़ा सा हिस्ट्री के ऊपर जब मैं जाता हूँ या हिस्ट्री को जब मैं कॉल करूंगा तो मेरे को एक चीज ध्यान आ रहा है कि पतिव्रता और सतीव्रता को अगर हम थोड़ा साइड में रखें और अगर हिंदू कल्चर हिंदुइज्म की मैं बात करूं हिंदू कल्चर में मैम एक बहुत फेमस डेस्टिनेशन है बीइंग ए स्टूडेंट ऑफ टूरिज्म मैं इस चीज को कंसीडर कर रहा हूं मैम एक आर्टिकल अभी न्यूज़पेपर में था आर्ट ओका पार्क ओका उसमें मैम एक नटनिया वर्ड का यूज किया गया है जिसमें कि राजाओं के पास जो नाचने का काम करती थी तो मैम उसमें बताया गया है कि वो सती प्रथा और पतिव्रता को साइड रखते हुए वो राज प्रथा को जो है वो रिलेट किया गया है वहां पे मैं थोड़ा सा आपको उसके बारे में बताऊंगा उसका मेरे को थोड़ा सा आप फिर कंक्लूज करके बता सकते हैं मैम उसमें मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि यस एक तो पतिव्रता जो अपने हस्बैंड के अंडर कुछ इसको कर रही है और सतीव्रता जो था इसमें खंड काल आया जिसको हम बोल सकते हैं एक टाइम पीरियड आया जिसमें राजाओं के अंडर कुछ चीजें आती थी और राजा कुछ चीजों को परस्यू करते थे तो वहां पे जो राजशाही के अंदर ऐसी लेडीज थी जो मतलब आप ये नहीं बोल सकते कि वो पतिव्रता थी क्योंकि वो राजाओं की ना तो रानियां थी ना ही तो हम उनको कुछ कॉल कर सकते हैं तो उस मैं जब उस हिस्ट्री को कॉल करता हूं तो उस हिस्ट्री को हम एक वुमेन फेमिनिज्म के साथ जोड़ के हम कैसे देख सकते हैं मेरे को थोड़ा सा इस चीज के ऊपर आप मतलब क्लियर करिए थोड़ा सा दैट्स माय क्वेश्चन
अच्छा कुशाल जी बहुत अच्छा क्वेश्चन है आपका देखिए जब हम अकॉर्डिंग टू हिंदुइज्म आदमी जब ये अर्थ में आता है द मैन कम्स ऑन टू दिस अर्थ टू फुलफिल 3 obligations. One is he has to worship his gods, through rituals. He has to worship his ancestors, and he has to worship his gurus. And then, he can complete his duties. That is his dharma. But for women, her dharma is only worshipping her husband, who performs all these duties, and through her husband, worshipping her husband, she is also able to perform all that duties. That is how we interpret it. So, for women, her only dharma was to worship her husband. And then, like I gave examples in the bhakti, a lot of women who questioned this. That is one aspect. Definitely, जो आप बात कर रहे हैं नर्तकी and उस समय की, you have, ये लोग भी तो उस समय free तो नहीं थे ना. All my work on courtesans and devdasis, I have worked on devdasis. Right. These were again very intelligent women. They were very good looking women. They were trained in music and dance. They belong to a separate category. See, one, you have the middle class women who's married, उसके लिए तो केवल एक husband ही God है. She has to worship him. And here you have these women, the devdasis, who are either in the temple or the courtesans who are in the court. By the time you come to end of 17th century, if you look at many of these Modi inscriptions and other, दोनों में जो gap था वो बिल्कुल कम हो गया था ना. Who's a devdasi and who's a courtesan became very kind of blurred at this time. Temples lost their patronage. Many of these women came out, they started dancing in public spaces, and they were, performing outside. So, चाहे वो, राजा को राजशाही है क्योंकि they are dependent on the king. Patronage तो उनको king से मिला है ना, इसलिए वो राजशाही को encourage कर रहे हैं. एक और पॉइंट जो मैं सती का कहने चाहती हूँ, हिस्ट्री में वी हैव हाइलाइटेड सती सो मच. वी टॉक ऑफ सती माता, सती स्टोन, सती टेम्पल्स ऑल ओवर. लेकिन इमेजिन, एज अ वुमेन, if you just burn your finger, what is the first reaction? You are going to shout and jump. Imagine a woman who is being burned as sati, her first reaction is going to be that she is going to run out of the fire. And imagine एक सती माता जो वो भाग गई है. What ideologically we had created such a big notion. So there were various ways in which sati was performed. When Raja Ram Mohan Roy became so much involved with women's issue because he saw his young sister-in-law being forced to commit sati. वो सती नहीं बनना चाहती थी. बंगाल में क्या करते थे, उनके हाथ ऊपर बांध देते थे, पैर बांध देते थे, और इतनी जोर की नगाड़े बजते थे, ड्रम्स बजते थे, मंत्रोच्चार होता था कि वो औरतों की चीखें दब जाती थी. मध्य प्रदेश में they would dig a pit which was 10 feet deep where a sati would take place. So even if the women wanted, she could not escape. 2005 में जब राजस्थान में एक रूप कंवर का केस हुआ था, पहली बार women's group said sati is nothing but a murder of women. तो हमने ये पूरे सती स्टोन बना के, सती टेम्पल्स बना के, आइडियोलॉजिकली वी हैव क्रिएटेड. क्लैरिसी बेडर 1827 में अपनी किताब विमेन इन एंशिएंट इंडिया लिखती है, हियर इज अ लेसन फॉर वेस्टर्न विमेन. The Indian law only wanted to identify a woman's life with her husband, but she went one step ahead and identified her death with her husband. They glorified sati to such an extent. Nobody looked upon it as a murder.
सेम एग्जाम्पल मैम, सॉरी बट मैम एक एग्जाम्पल मैं आपको सेम एग्जाम्पल दे रहा हूँ मैम. एक हिमाचल के अंदर एक डिस्ट्रिक्ट है सिरमौर. दैट्स द वन ऑफ द नेम ऑफ द डिस्ट्रिक्ट मैम. वो डिस्ट्रिक्ट एक्चुअल में जब हम उसकी हिस्ट्री को कॉल करते हैं तो उसकी हिस्ट्री में निकल गया था कि मैम ये जो मैंने आपको एक एग्जाम्पल दिया ना कि राजशाही को कैसे जोड़ के, तो मैम वहां पे एक नचनिया, हमारे यहाँ पे नचनिया जो राजाओं के पास काम करते थे उनको नचनिया. मैम दैट्स द टू वैलीज. One is the Toka and one is the Poka. It's the two valleys in Sirmaur district. It's located in the maybe near to Solan and Baddi. That's the industrial in Himachal Pradesh. Then मैम वहां पे जो नचनिया थी वो राजा को बोलती है कि यस मैं आपकी वो क्या जिसको मैंने आपसे जो वर्ड मैंने पूछा कि उसको हम क्या बोल सकते हैं, वो राजा की पत्नी तो थी नहीं बट वो राजा के नचनिया थी, नाचने का काम करती थी. बट राजा ने मैम उसको जब अपनी प्रॉपर्टीज के ऊपर डिनाई किया तो उसने एक कमिटमेंट किया कि यस वन वैली टू सेकंड वैली. मैम ये जिसका हम यूज करते हैं, जिसको हम एक हिंदुइज्म में हम ये यूज करते हैं ना औला, इसको हम कुछ हमारे बोलते हैं इसको मैम. That's all कि वो एक वैली से दूसरी वैली के लिए ओई डालेगी और उसके ऊपर नाचती क्रॉस करेगी. देन अगर वो क्रॉस करती है तो वो राजा की प्रॉपर्टी के राइट के लिए उसका क्रॉस करता है. यस मैम. और मैम वो इन द टाइम कि जो राजा का सेक्रेटरी था जिसको हम वजीर बोलते हैं, उसने बट उसकी एक शर्त थी कि इसको काटेगा नहीं कोई। जब वो मैम क्रॉस करके वो वापिस आ रही है, देन वो राजा का वजीर उसको काटता है। वो मैम इन द वन ऑफ द रिवर इन सिरमौर डिस्ट्रिक्ट, देन उस रिवर में गिरती है और वो डूबते 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 बोलती है कि आठ टोका पार पोका डूबी मरो सिरमौर दिया लोग का। और मैम यू नो इट्स ए बिलीव एंड दैट्स द हिस्ट्री कि आज सिरमौर नाम का वहां पे एक बहुत बड़ा शहर था मैम, आज सिरमौर नाम कुछ भी नहीं है वहां पे। That's the power of ladies. That's the power of women. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Kushal Singh. You know, when I talk of, we are talking about her story. Let me talk. See, I have written this in many of my writings. Yes. When we talk of women's history, see, all our history is from a very male point of view. No? It's always his story, not her story. Now, when we talk of women's story, her story, what we have done, again, we talk in terms of classes. You know, we only talk of the middle class women who is married. But where do you place women like the courtesan? You know, इनको तवायफ कहते थे दक्कन में. Where do you place women like the dancing girls? You know, जो later on देवदासी term use हुआ है. Or they are very, you know, they were neither married, they were not tied to one man, they were, you know, neither tied to, they were married to God, or hamesha, because they will never have the pangs of widowhood. So, you know, these are very interesting areas. We really need to work on these. I will be very happy if you can share with me some of the articles which are written in, I'm not aware of so much of the developments in Himachal or yahan pe kya likha hai. But ye area, you know, since I work a lot on courtesans, dancing girls, this is something which is of personal interest to me. See, unless we bring out stories of these women, our story of the past will not be complete. And what you said is very important. Yes. This is something which is really required. We need to really work on these different areas.
Ma'am, there's a question by Dr. Shobha Mishra. Actually, there's another question by Mr. Sukhdev, but I'll come to that later. From where we get reference of worshipping husband? This is her question. In connection with that, I also have one question, ma'am. And just related to what discussion we were having a minute ago. There is a question of worshipping husband. There is a hypocrisy there. A married man can have relationship with another woman, and yet he is not in the past society I'm talking about. And yet he is not considered as impure. Whereas a woman devotes her entire life to her husband. And when there are women who have relationship with multiple men, they come in the category of tawayafs, as you just said. So, madam's question is where we get the reference of worshipping husband. And my question is, are there no references of a husband being patni vrata or having only a single wife anywhere in the scriptures?
Yeah, see, you know, it's not that one reference. Overall, अगर आप पढ़िए text को, जैसे मैंने बताया कि एक आदमी के लिए he has to worship his ancestors, he has to worship his gods, and then, you know, that is his dharma. But a women's dharma, she has to worship the man who does all this. It is, you know, like Marx says, it's never a direct relationship. You know, what do many of the Marxist feminists say? You know, that men, you determine a man's status depending on whether they own those means of production, whether they are working on those means of production. But a women's relationship is to that man who owns that means of production or is working through that means of production. It's never a direct one. So, you know, many women feel alienation. A man, you know, they occupy the world outside. They are part of the whole world outside, and yet they have access into the family. They are also part of the inner world. Whereas for many women who are only part of the inner world, they don't have access to the outside world. So women feel very alienated. Till the time the children are small, they are taking care of the children, you know, it is there. But then when the children leave, when the husband gets so busy with their work, you know, what does they talk of a problem without a name. So women undergo a lot of these areas. So it's not that at one point the worship of husband came. It is written. That is something which is expected. If I quote a large number of male, you know, Kabir says कि वो husband चाहे deaf हो, blind हो, पंगु हो, बगी हो, a woman's duty is only to husband, worship her husband. सारे male भक्ताओं की, ये सारे male भक्ताओं की आप writings पढ़ो. I've written a lot about that also. And today, you know, because of the shortage of time, I didn't emphasize on that. They all talk about this aspect, that how, you know, however the husband is, you have to worship him. And definitely, throughout this period, you do have double standard. The very fact that the tawaifs existed, the very fact that these prostitutes existed, the very fact that many of these, dancing girls who later on became prostitute existed, because obviously the men were going to them. So they were, you had the women who is at home, she takes care of the family. She is seen as a symbol of, goddess, and this is something which has impacted. Look at our notions of masculinity today, and look at our whole notions of how do we, honor. A woman's honor depends on her, how she behaves, how she takes care of her family. And you should never, what happens in a caste war today? When you want to take a revenge against the other caste, you rape their women, because it's not that you have anything against those women. You want to send a message to the males in that group that you're not man enough to protect your women. And they have learned this from the partition. What happened in the partition? Muslim men were raping Hindu women, cutting their body parts. Hindu men were raping Muslim women and cutting their body parts. You were trying to send a message to the other community that you are not man enough to protect your women. So, our whole notion of masculinity, our whole notion of how we have defined it in the Indian context is through the women. And that is what has created all these complexities. Fine.
Thank you.
Manali, I want to add something to your question. You asked about a reference, about any reference of husbands being honest towards their wives. I get one reference from Ramayana. Like we can see that Rama didn't marry anyone else. He sent his wife to Vanavas, I agree. But he never touched any other women or married. So I guess that can be taken as a reference.
Definitely. See, that is the whole ideal, no? Why we look upon Ram as the Maryada Purushottam is for this reason. Fine. Yeah. Shobha has a question. Yeah, please.
मैम एक्चुअली मैं ये बोलना चाहती हूँ, जैसे हम मातृ देवो भव, पितृ देवो भव, अतिथि देवो भव सुनते हैं, तो ये तो कॉन्सेप्ट है ही कि विमेन को अंडर में रहना है हमेशा, मनुस्मृति या आगे की भी जो है स्मृतियों में. बट कहीं ऐसा मुझे नहीं ऐसा दिखा कि पति को देवता मानना चाहिए. मतलब अंडर में रहेगी बट ऐसे नहीं कि उसको देवता की तरह पूजा करनी है. एक वो नटी वाला जो पूछ रहे थे वो सर, वो उसको हम एक ऑक्यूपेशनल उसमें भी ले सकते हैं ना, जो नृत्यांगनाएं हैं या नटी हैं, वो एक तरीके से इकोनॉमिकली वो स्ट्रांग है, क्योंकि हमारे पास कोई ऐसे पैट्रियार्की सिस्टम में ऐसा नहीं था कि स्त्रियों को कोई संपत्ति के अधिकार हो. बट कुछ जो ग्रुप्स थे लोअर क्लास के या लोअर मिडिल क्लास के, तो उन लोग के पास वो इकोनॉमिकली फ्री थी, वो गेन कर सकती थी. तो ये एक तरीके से हम ऑक्यूपेशन के तौर पर भी ले सकते हैं. उसमें उनकी सोसाइटी या हायरार्किकल स्टेटस में कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता था. हायर एजुकेशन जो हाई ग्रुप्स की थी लेडीज, उनके लिए थे सारे नियम. या जो हम एक कहते हैं कि थ्योरेटिकली ये था कि ठीक है हमारे यहाँ एक पति या एक पत्नी विवाह था, बट अलग अलग होता था. पर ये जो पति देवो भव वाली बात है, बहुत सारी चीजों में ये हम इसको कहीं ऐसा लिखा नहीं है. 3 ऋणों की बात आपने करी, जो पितृ ऋण होता है, देव ऋण, ऋषि ऋण, वो बिना स्त्री के कंप्लीट नहीं किया जा सकता था, बिना पत्नी के. तो वो उसमें सब लोग सब साथ थे. तो कहाँ पर मतलब एंशिएंट पीरियड में तो इक्वली था ही, लगभग इक्वल था. बाद में कंडीशंस खराब होते चले गए. तो ये अगर हम एंशिएंट पीरियड में देखें तो पति देवो भव जैसा, क्योंकि बहुत सारी चीजें थी, सती प्रथा भी नहीं थी, नियोग प्रथा परमिटेड थी कहीं कहीं, और भी चीजें ऐसी थी जिसमें लगता था कि स्त्रियों को अच्छी खासी आजादी मिली हुई थी और वो एंजॉय कर रही थी. दूसरा ये था कि संपत्ति में क्यों नहीं था भाग, क्योंकि जो हमारा कंसेप्ट था उसमें भूमि अचल संपत्ति में थी. उससे प्रायर पीरियड में तो भूमि संपत्ति में गिनी ही नहीं जाती थी. पशु थे, बाकी कुछ वैल्यूएबल आपके मेटल्स होते थे. तो इसलिए ये वाली चीज थी कि आप विवाह करके दहेज या स्त्री का भाग उसको दे दिया जाता था एक तरीके से, क्योंकि जमीन तो बटेगी नहीं और लड़की को ही जाना है दूसरे घर. तो शायद इस तरह से ये सिस्टम था हमारे. अगर हम इसे इकोनॉमिकली कनेक्ट करने की कोशिश करें तो कहीं कहीं पर ऐसा नहीं था कि बहुत बुरी स्थिति थी। लेटर पीरियड में वो चीजें तो खराब होती चली गई, पर हम अगर एंशियंट कंसेप्ट में देखें, तो कॉन्टेक्स्ट में देखें, तो पति देवो भव, आजकल पति देव कहते हैं बट मुझे ऐसा कोई मिला नहीं, तो मुझे लगा शायद आपको कहीं से ऐसा रेफरेंस मिला हो, तो प्लीज बता दीजिएगा।
नहीं, शोभा जी, जो आपने क्वेश्चन पुट अप किया है बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग है, बट ये कहने की बात नहीं है। जैसे मैंने बताया, पूरे रिलीजन में नहीं, द हस्बैंड वर्शिप्स, ये 3 रण पूरे करेगा, और विमेन का धर्म है कि पति की वर्शिप करना, उसके लिए तो भगवान उसका पति ही है ना। दैट इज द अंडरलाइंग फिलॉसफी. We really don't have to write it as such. This is something which is there. और सेकंड, मैं आपकी बात से ये इतना नहीं सहमत होंगी कि बहुत फ्रीडम थी, क्योंकि ये इतना पेट्रियार्कल सोसाइटी थी कि केवल पुरुष प्रधान, और बेटों को, आप कोई भी अपने हम टेक्स्ट को पढ़ लीजिए, यू हैव 100 सन्स, यू हैव 90 सन्स, 100 पुत्रों की माता भव, आज भी दूधो नहाओ पूतो फलो, ये सब जो है, इट इज सो ऑब्सेस्ड विद द प्रोडक्शन ऑफ अ सन. लड़की की तो हम कहीं बात नहीं करते. At one level, philosophically, we are talking of Devi as a great power, ये प्रकृति की हम बात करते हैं. But reality में क्या है, क्योंकि women cannot participate in any rituals. It is only a son. और जो पुत्र जो बोलते हैं ना, पुत्र has come from the word put. अगर ऋण, पिता क्या है, अपना ऋण अपने बेटे को दे सकता है, अपनी बेटी के ऊपर नहीं छोड़ सकता है. तो इसलिए look at all these, that is the reason the son becomes very important. Rituals also only the son can perform, the women cannot perform, and therefore it is in fact itne jo there are so many sayings in that period. If you look at it, jab husband wife, jab wife pregnant ho jati hai, both husband wife go and pray to sun god, and they say, oh God, grant us a son here and a daughter elsewhere. और इट इज आप केवल लड़के की ही कामना करते हैं. ये भी लिखा गया है कि अगर इफ यू डोंट बिहेव प्रॉपरली, द मेल फीटस कैन बी कन्वर्टेड टू अ फीमेल फीटस. एंड ये पुंसे वरना व्रत किस लिए होता था, औरतों को इतने व्रत करने पड़ते थे सो दैट शी गिव्स बर्थ टू अ मेल. तो मेल की तो प्रिडोमिनेंस है ही वो सोसाइटी में. वी गिव सो मच ऑफ एन इंपॉर्टेंस टू दैट. द वुमेन इज नॉट गिवन, द गर्ल इज नॉट गिवन. इसका अगर आज आप उसमें भी देख लीजिए, तेलुगु में एक प्रॉवर्ब है, ब्रिंगिंग अप अ डॉटर इज लाइक वाटरिंग प्लांट्स इन समवन एल्सेस गार्डन. तो वो we still have that notion that the girls do not belong to this family, they will be married, they have to be sent off. Whereas the boy, how much ever, till today we have this notion that the boy belongs to the family, he has a right, whether the boy may take care of his parents or not. तो ये सारी जो philosophical, our mindset has not just been created today, it has been developed over so many years. So these ideas have been fixed, or they have a lot of impact in how we deal with society, our whole notions of society. ठीक है, तो कुछ बातें सही है, लेकिन एक बहुत मेल प्रधान, पुत्र प्रधान सोसाइटी है, उसी को हमने बहुत इंपॉर्टेंस दी है. और उसके लिए maybe the context, the socio-religious context of that period is there.
Absolutely.
Thank you, ma'am.
Absolutely true, ma'am. Even now, being a single girl child myself, I have heard this sentence oftentimes. People referring to me as "तुम बेटे से भी बढ़कर हो." You are like a son to your parents, and I'm like, no, I am a daughter, and I'm really happy with that. So that is still there, what you're mentioning. Just one last question we are taking, ma'am, because it is already posted. And are there feminine forms of God in Hinduism that are not associated with being a mother? I have found male gods being called friend or big brother, but female gods are only mothers in my observation. This question is posted by Mr. Sukhdev.
As mothers, I mean, that is either you worship them as feminine power, and definitely more you have only as a mother. I think even I'm not aware if there are these other forms which are there. So you look upon them, but definitely, when you look upon Kali, majority of the gods, चाहे हम लक्ष्मी की बात करते हैं, सरस्वती की, female consorts to male gods are seen as mothers. लेकिन जब हम काली की worship करते हैं, Kali is not just as a mother, yes, she has that divine power, and so she is a very independent god in that sense. Durga also by and large is not seen only as a mother. So you have both these variations which are found in our scriptures, Fine. So it's not just as a mother.
I want to mention something. We can see Radha, like in northern India, Radha Rani is worshipped with Krishna. She was not wife or mother, but just a friend of Krishna. So we can see that.
Yeah, and see, we worship so much Radha, and there is so much space in Hinduism. He is married to Rukmini, but it is Radha who becomes very important, So even that is something which is accepted in Hinduism.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we have come to the end of this session, ma'am. With your permission, I would like to propose a vote of thanks.
Right.
Once again, on behalf of myself, Nidhi, Nandan sir, and my entire executive team, I thank Professor Rekha Pande ma'am for taking out time. She's actually in USA right now, but constantly with us from miles and miles away. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and being with us here today, ma'am. It means a lot to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, I also want to thank our honorary president, Sri Nandan Shastri ji, all the participants who have actively participated, and this wonderful, very, very interesting and intriguing question and answer session that followed the lecture. Thank you all for asking such questions, wonderful questions. I also thank my friend Ms. Nidhi Katti, who moderated this session very successfully. We are signing off. The second day of this international webinar has gone by very, very wonderfully. It has gone by without any glitches. So we are thankful to all the participants for that. See you all tomorrow at 4:30. We will post the link and the posters for each session in the group. Stay tuned for that. Thank you. Good night, Shubhratri, and good day to you, ma'am.
Okay, bye-bye. Keep your interest alive in history. It's wonderful to see the young generation taking over, and especially, working so much on her history. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
See. Bye.
Recording stopped.